Hey, sorry, the stream just dropped out. I am currently talking to 0 people, so now I'm wondering what the issue is. I'm on a pretty lackluster, I guess, hotel internet connection at the moment, so it dropped out for whatever reason. So now I'm on my phone's Wi-Fi because apparently my hotspot on my phone is of better quality than the hotel Wi-Fi. So sorry about that. Where was I? I think. Can somebody mention to me in the comments what the last thing you heard me discuss was, so then I know when the stream dropped out. I pretty much went through the Warren Bernie episode, and so people can go to the previous stream and hear my account of that if they missed it. Okay, who this hurts more, Warren or Sanders? So I mean, I drew the analogy to 2004, right? And I'm sort of struggling to know when the stream dropped out while I was talking last time. Yeah, so in 2004, which is a parallel potentially to 2020, because in 2004, the Democrats were desperate to nominate somebody who could defeat the incumbent GOP president, then George W. Bush, who was widely disdained. And there's even another layer of analogy potentially, given that 2004 was very much about foreign policy, and although the Iraq War was on a much bigger scale than what's happening now with Iran, there might be some kind of potential parallel there. And it's all the more ironic because Biden is widely thought to possibly benefit because he's seen from a foreign policy crisis, because he's seen as like a steady hand and somebody who has a lot of quote experience, when a central pillar of his experience is voting for the 2002 authorization for use of military force in Iraq, which he keeps obfuscating about. He even obfuscated it to me directly when I questioned him about the his narrative around that vote back in September. When you can go find that on the channel or at Real Clear Politics if you want. But the analogy to 2004 in the context. Oh, and by the way, the Trump administration is now invoking the 2002 authorization for use of military force against Iraq, which was intended to give legal authority for the U.S. military to go after Saddam Hussein. They're now saying that 18 years later, that legal justification applies to their strike on Soleimani, which is beyond absurd in every conceivable way. And even many Republicans have said that that's totally absurd, including Mike Lee and Rand Paul. But Biden really, if people were more attuned to these issues, should be pressed on how 18 years later that vote from 2002 is still haunting the country, because it's being cited now to give legal justification to war against Iran, which is just ludicrous. But anyway, the 2004 analogy I brought up because in 2004, I don't know if you were old enough or if you followed politics at the time. I was only 16, so it's not as though I had a really sophisticated understanding of it. But I still followed it, and I recall very much that Howard Dean and Dick Gephardt developed a pretty bruising feud. They went after each other fairly ruthlessly and tried to tear each other down. And what ended up happening is that both candidates, Dean and Gephardt, sunk, and the candidates who tried to kind of present themselves as above the fray, John Kerry and John Edwards, rose fairly dramatically in the waning days of the campaign leading up to the Iowa caucus in 2004. And what happened ultimately was that John Kerry won the caucus and pretty much sailed to the nomination. So obviously very different circumstances now to 2004. We have no idea whether the same dynamics could play out, but one possible scenario is that if Bernie and Warren end up really going after one another, and this salvo from Warren indicates that that's what she's intending to do, then it doesn't necessarily redound to the benefit of either of them. And what could end up happening is that somebody who was seen to be a peacemaker or somebody who doesn't get down to the mud like a Biden could benefit. And if Biden wins the Iowa caucus, that really just catapults his odds of winning the nomination overall. Not that it's a sure thing, not that something unexpected couldn't happen, but if Biden ends up winning in the state, which demographically was always assumed to be one of the least advantageous to him, then he would become far, far, far more formidable to win the nomination overall. And there was a poll today which put him in first place in Iowa from Monmouth, which is a respected pollster and is usually pretty accurate. Not to say it's infallible, not to say that there couldn't be problems with its sampling or methodology, but just to say that it has a relatively decent track record. Although you do have to then bear in mind as well that Bernie was first in Iowa according to the poll that's seen as the gold standard in the state, the Des Moines Register poll, which has been quite accurate recently. But we still have 3 weeks to go, and there's a lot of variability in the race. People are still making up their minds. So, what maybe the cynical conspiracy explanation for Warren going down this route is to basically just kamikaze Bernie and take herself out in the process, right? That's what you do with a kamikaze, and allows somebody like a Biden to rise to the top, and then maybe she could be VP or something. I mean, again, it's a little far-fetched, and we can't say that with any certitude, obviously, but when her tactics radically changed like they just have over the past 24 to 48 hours, then it does make you kind of want to sketch out some potential rationales for what she's up to that may seem far-fetched, but then who knows? It seemed far-fetched to some that she would go after Bernie in this way. And if this attack doesn't seem effective to you, I think you have to sort of step back and try to be a little objective in the sense of not using your own subjective biases to assess the efficacy of the attack, right? So think about a potential voter in Iowa for whom this attack might have some purchase. So I'm thinking of a middle-aged woman potentially who supported Hillary in 2016 in the caucus, right? Thinks Hillary got robbed, and is inclined to support a woman on balance, right? Just because they feel like we were long past due for a female president or what have you. But they could be persuaded to vote for Bernie purely on account of that they are desperate to defeat Trump, right? So if even if they have misgivings about Bernie, if Bernie to them is portrayed as the candidate who has the best chance of defeating Trump, then they will vote for Bernie, right? So, but at this point, 3 weeks out, maybe they're undecided, maybe they're still weighing different factors, and all of a sudden, this quasi bombshell, bursts onto their social media feeds and TV screens, and most people don't read past the headline, right? Most people don't analyze the sources and all that. All they see is that Bernie told Warren that a woman can't win. And so that's what the vast majority of people who are absorbing this story are going to see. They're not going to have the ability to discern what might have been the underlying causes for this story. They're not going to know the the narrative yesterday with Warren saying that she was trashed, and then her sending out a fundraising email to complain that Bernie was trashing her, and then taking another step and seeming, we don't know this for sure again, right? But seeming to orchestrate this attack on Bernie, which for some reason she kept concealed for over a year. That Bernie all of a sudden became this frothing misogynist in a private conversation, and said he doesn't think that a woman could ever win the presidency, which I also think is false. I just think it depends on the woman. I don't think that Hillary was a good nominee for 10 million reasons, most of which have zero to do with her gender. And whereas I think plenty of women could have conceivably won in 2016 and and in 2020. And by the way, that includes Republican women, potentially. So, In any event, I don't know that anybody who's really familiar with Bernie's personal history, trajectory, and general outlook on things would really believe that he all of a sudden says that there's no way a woman could win. I think probably what happened is that in the context of that conversation, what Bernie said was something to the effect of, a woman who is a nominee might have a unique set of obstacles in dealing with Trump because, according to Bernie, Trump is a misogynist and he's going to leverage misogyny to undercut the nominee, just like he did with Hillary, right? So going back to that theoretical female voter in Iowa, right, who thinks that Hillary was wrongly deprived of the presidency in 2016 and might have been persuaded to vote for Hillary for Bernie. Now all of a sudden they get this newsflash that Bernie is some kind of misogynist, and I could see that kind of voter now being really turned off from Bernie. Now, does it mean that they're going to vote for Warren? Not necessarily. It could mean that they vote for Biden or somebody. And there's a lot of variability and unpredictability in how voters react to discrete events. But we're now at a phase in the campaign where people are going to make up their minds. And if the people who Bernie needs to reach now to solidify his lead in Iowa, or if he doesn't have a lead to kind of nudge him into first place, if some of those people aren't the ones who are in his core constituency, they're going to be people who may have, doubts about him in some respects. And if a story like this reinforces those doubts, then possibly it could harm him. I don't know. Or maybe none of this will matter in 3 weeks and he'll win a resounding victory. Who knows? A lot of unpredictability now. That's why it's sort of interesting to follow, especially if you were just sort of interested in U.S. politics from the standpoint of a keen observer. But it's possible, again, if you just want to be totally cynical about this, and I think there's good reason to be cynical given how this was seemingly calculated, that Warren is going whole hog against Bernie, because there's no other good explanation for this. I don't know that she hasn't really gone after any other candidate in this fashion aside from Pete in that most recent debate. And I thought she had the upper hand against Pete potentially, but people felt it was a draw or whatever. But now she's obviously trained her ire on Bernie, and of course, whatever pact that Bernie and Warren had amongst themselves that was brokered in 2018 could never hold in perpetuity because they're competing against one another for power, right? And they have competing political visions and competing coalitions. So, obviously this was going to come to a head at some point. It was just sort of a matter of when and how. And now we know that Warren is evidently willing to resort to fairly sleazy, almost Hillary-like tactics against Bernie, although I don't even think Hillary really ever went quite this far in 2016, because she didn't perceive Bernie as really as much of a threat as I think candidates probably do now. Because Hillary would always assume that she would be the nominee, even if there was a little turmoil along the way, and Bernie won a couple caucuses and primaries, right? So yeah, that's sort of where things shake out. And notice that the story on this was delivered to CNN, which also happens to be hosting the debate tomorrow. So I'm assuming that they're going to lead the debate with this story, which goes right to according to plan, if that's what they've calculated, right, in terms of what the Warren campaign's tactic is here. And see how it works out. I just tweeted about this, but aren't you glad that tomorrow we're going to have Tom Steyer and Amy Klobuchar on the stage instead of Tulsi and Yang? Doesn't that really improve the quality of the overall debate? I mean, come on. it's sort of a joke how these debates have been run from the outset, and it's coming to a head now because even if you're just a standard generic Democrat, right? Even if you just want the party to prosper, why would you arbitrarily toss out two candidates who obviously have something of a following within the party, right? And could bring more people into the party if they feel like the candidate they prefer has been well treated, has been given an opportunity to expound their views on the debate stage. So Yang and Tulsi, even though they're not like your prototypical Democrats, they can still make people who in the abstract would never really entertain the possibility of becoming a committed Democrat. They can still bring them into the Democratic Party coalition. So it just seems like almost like self-defeating for the party to have these ridiculous standards. Um, but now we have a billionaire who bought his way onto the stage in just almost comical fashion by flooding the airwaves in Iowa and in everywhere in Iowa and New Hampshire, but most meaningfully in Nevada and South Carolina. That's what Steyer's been doing, and he's able to saturate the markets there because other candidates are kind of conserving their resources, and he doesn't have to do that because he's a billionaire, and he could just go wild on TV and radio and with mailers and such, and just make sure every last soul in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada gets the Tom Steyer message, whatever that is exactly. It's kind of hard to define. And as a result, he got a pretty good return on his investment. He was, I think, was it second place in South Carolina in a Fox News poll from a couple days ago? And he was, I believe, in third place in Nevada, which is just like nutty. But it allowed him to get the qualifying polls needed to get on the debate stage. I'm in New Hampshire now, and like every time I glance at the TV, there are Tom Steyer ads. Or I've even heard them on the radio. I don't even listen to the radio. I go to a public place, and the Tom Steyer ads are on. Now, in fairness, I'm hearing ads and seeing ads from others too. Yang has plenty of ads, and they're actually kind of irritating because it's just like these classic, soft lit, heavily produced political ads with him talking earnestly into the camera and playing with his children and stuff, and it's a little irritating. But Steyer is just totally flooding the markets. He's gotten a return on his investment. He's sort of gamed the rules by the DNC, set by the DNC, and he's on the debate stage. And by the way, there is a Tulsi ad running. It's actually an ad that was first released in May, and but now they're running it in New Hampshire, and it's an anti-war ad essentially. It's it's a little heavily produced, but it's on balance, I think, pretty good. Basically, it's just saying, it's her narrating it, saying, I saw the cost of war, and now I promise to never stop fighting for peace, which is a fairly compelling message now, I think, given what's going on with Iran and everything else. But she doesn't have as much money as the others, so you got to compete for TV slots. I did just see it on TV this afternoon in the diner here in New Hampshire that's nearby. So it is on. And you can even look it up if you want. I think it's entitled "I'll Never Stop Fighting for Peace," and it's on YouTube. And so Tulsi is excluded from the debates, which is a total joke because if there's ever a time she should be on the debate stage, it's during a foreign policy crisis. But she's out from the debates, and so is Yang. So the internet brigades, who form at least a significant part of their respective support bases, are going to be annoyed at that, as well they should be. But in lieu of the debate, Tulsi is having an interesting event tomorrow, which, if you're in the area, if you're in the area of Concord, New Hampshire, you can get there. I would highly recommend you go to this. Whether or not you support Tulsi, I think it would be fascinating. I would go regardless, but I'll be there because I'm in the area. It's going to be at, and I have the information in front of me, it's going to be at NHTI Community College, 31 College Drive, Concord, New Hampshire, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Tulsi talks Iran with Dennis Kucinich and Stephen Kinzer. Should be really good. Dennis Kucinich obviously played a role somewhat similar to Tulsi and Pat, but not the same, but comparable in certain ways to Tulsi in past election cycles. He ran for president in 2004 and 2008 on a vocally anti-war platform. And Kucinich has endorsed Tulsi and is one of her very few endorsers of much prominence, especially in the political world. I'm not counting Joe Rogan, even though that is a significant endorsement. But in terms of people who actually hold elected office or have held elected office, Kucinich is one of the vanishingly few who has endorsed Tulsi. And I believe now for the first time he's going to be appearing with her on stage tomorrow. And as you recall, if you followed my coverage of Tulsi or you just follow the campaign in general, you may know that Kucinich is the one that she went with on the infamous or famous trip to Syria in 2017 that has dominated so much of the public discussion around her candidacy. So I would be highly interested to hear their joint recollections of that trip where they, yes, did meet with Assad, but also many others in 2017 and how it relates to their diagnosis of what's happening with Iran. And also appearing with them is Stephen Kinzer, who is a former journalist and now an academic who has written many great books on U.S. foreign policy and especially on regime change. I've read a couple of them, and they are very good. So I would recommend that you look up especially his book, Overthrow, which is basically a history of U.S. regime change efforts. And in my very first extended interview that I did with Tulsi, she mentioned Stephen Kinzer as an influence on her. So this is an event that I had wanted to see come together for a long time, and sure enough, it is. So I'll be there, and I'll repeat the information. I saw somebody ask me to do that. It is 6 p.m. tomorrow. NHTI Community College, 31 College Drive, Concord, New Hampshire. And I think you could just look it up on her Facebook page if you didn't get that. All right, so another topic, and I did a video on this yesterday, and I saw some people mentioning it on the chat earlier, so I guess I could just address it again, is this whole issue of this individual who I identified yesterday, Noam Blum, known under the online alias of Neon Taster. I decided that I would present identifying information about this individual, not because it had ever been presented before. Actually, Noam Blum himself had revealed his identity on Twitter and Twitch. It was just a matter of sort of crystallizing it and formulating it into something that gave direct insight onto who this character was. And, it caused a big 48-hour Twitter storm, which, seems to be subsiding somewhat. Some of my more right-leaning followers were appalled by it, and many of them unfollowed me en masse, which I was really offended by. Actually, not offended at all. I could not care less. Goodbye. Good riddance. Don't care. I love when people sort of like melodramatically proclaim that they are unfollowing you, whether it's on YouTube or Twitter or elsewhere, as if like that's supposed to be a real stake through your heart. And how are you ever going to get over that some random person got mad about something? So yeah, the rationale behind this that I stick by is borne out because now Noam Blum is understood to have been somebody who worked for one of the leading neoconservative think tanks, specifically in the area of multimedia. So he says he's a social media consulting guy, and he decided to keep up this quasi anonymity online, which again wasn't real anonymity because he already revealed his identity. It was just a matter of somebody like putting it out there in a digestible way. So I mean, if I've debated it with people, and you can go look through my feed if you want. The conservative, like the fake online conservative media, is in an uproar over it. They think that I doxed him. Yeah, yeah. Doxing is when you maliciously publicize somebody's private identifying information for the purpose of just harming them, such as their address, their phone number, their etc. Right? That's not what happened here. All the information that I got from Noam Blum had already been put out by Noam Blum himself. So, nobody's showing up to Noam Blum's apartment or something to harangue him. Um, and when you call this kind of thing doxing, what you do is conflate doxing with reporting. Now, are there legitimate cases of doxing that's been malicious, or even cases when journalists have reported on individuals whose information I didn't think was warranted to divulge? Yes. And I've actually criticized that many times. But it's not doxing when somebody who has an institutional affiliation, institutional backing from a prominent think tank, and is a member of the most preeminent neoconservative familial dynasty, and neoconservative familial dynasties are known to be experts at nepotism and to use nepotism to exert their influence over a variety of fields. Identifying a person in those circumstances is not doxing. It's reporting. It's not even really that sophisticated of reporting because, again, this was all just public. So, I'm happy to defend that. Whoever wants to debate it. I got some interesting private messages from people who were pleased that now they have additional context to understand the nature of Noam Blum's online behavior. Because if you have a guy who is running around supporting every hawkish foreign policy initiative and doing it under the veneer of like this anonymous video game persona, who likes is into anime and pop culture commentary and stuff, but occasionally throws in the hawkish foreign policy advocacy, especially if he's connected to influential media and political circles. I think the public benefits by having fuller context as to who that individual is, and that's what I helpfully provided. So next time Noam Blum is promoting a regime change initiative, as he's done in the case of, for example, Venezuela, people will maybe think twice when they recognize that Noam Blum's uncle, Elliot Abrams, is the one who is literally in charge of organizing the regime change operation. So that, I'm glad, is out there. And if people want to call it doxing, I respond by saying that your notion of doxing is comically debased of any meaning, because if you're using doxing in that fashion, you have no understanding of what the word actually means, and rather you're misappropriating it to demand that information in the public interest be kept concealed. Now, does this mean that anybody whose political opinions I don't like would therefore dox or reveal? No. Plenty of people who I dislike, who I would never reveal the identity of. It's a matter of his concealment of his institutional backing, which again involved doing social media consulting, right? As he was employed by this neoconservative think tank. And that was really the overriding factor in terms of why I believed that it was justified and continued to believe it. And his membership in the most prominent neocon family dynasty gives added context as to how people should assess his views. And so I'm thrilled that it was done. And I could not care less if a bunch of my followers who are, center right or whatever, want to stand up and condemn me for being so horrible. I will never apologize for identifying the influence of nepotistic political networks in the U.S., whether that be in the media, in think tanks, in wherever political power resides in the U.S., which increasingly includes social media, like it or not. I mean, you'd be shocked at how utterly tethered every single campaign is in one way or another to social media. It plays just a ridiculously outsized role. Now, they'll try to counterbalance it by focusing on other stuff, right? But everybody's got it right on their phone. Everybody's constantly refreshing, so it does have a big influence. And in recognition of that, I believe that uh, putting out context on the nature of this prominent social media personality was not just warranted, but required by me upon me to in service of my readership and viewership. Okay, um, so that was part 2 of the stream. Sorry for the technical error. And if you do happen to come to that event tomorrow, say hello. Otherwise, I will talk to you later, probably tomorrow after the debate. Somebody asks, did you read Bernie's interview with the MIT editorial board? If so, what did you think of the exchange on immigration? I'm worried that Bernie is caving to pressure from the overly woke left. I read most of it. I didn't actually see that immigration part, so I'd have to look at that. Sorry, but there is a very distinct possibility that the sort of the millennial advisors who have glommed onto the campaign are trying to push him into a position on immigration that I think would be totally untenable. Which, even if it doesn't explicitly advocate for open borders, right? I don't think he would use that term. If it has a connotation of open borders, I feel that's going to be really hard to sell. But that's a lot of what people, especially in the online progressive Twitter sphere type places, that's what they demand, and I think it's a foolish demand. So I wouldn't be surprised if Bernie's position on immigration ends up being a liability for him. He'd be much better off if he kept the position on immigration that he articulated in his last campaign, which was kind of a reasonable trade off between maintaining national sovereignty with borders and also using compassion from people who on people who are have entered the country without sufficient legal documentation, etc. I'm not going to get into a whole soliloquy on immigration, but I feel like his position last time around was probably a lot more defensible and also politically advantageous to him. So we'll have to see, but we'll go and look at that part of the New York Times editorial board interview, which I guess I glossed over because I just kind of skimmed it. Somebody asked, "What's the attitude towards Tulsi on the ground in New Hampshire?" She the attitude is at her events is positive, which I guess she would expect, because people who are either supporting her or maybe curious to support her. Um, it's much more positive than I would have expected. I'm not doesn't necessarily, but maybe I'm not just not hearing from the people who loathe her, right? Um, I have a wide variety of people who are supportive of her that you would never expect if, again, you were just tethered to the online narratives. So you have leftists, anti-war people, you have generic Democrats, you have Trump supporters, all of whom have expressed to me personally positive sentiments about her. She still does have a little bit of an issue with name recognition, which is why she's actually invested a lot on billboards, which is not a mode of advertising that really many other candidates have used. So even just down the road from where I am in Manchester, there's a big billboard of Tulsi. So I mean, I would think that might have some impact, but it's hard to say. I think if she's able to overperform in New Hampshire, maybe that'll give her a boost, because she'll have defied expectations. And when I say overperform, I would think she would probably have to get into the double digits at least. And it's within the realm of plausibility. Let's say, put it that way. Um, Okay, I'll leave it there for now, and I'll talk to you all later.